I did 21 years for a crime that I committed at 17 years old in which no one was physically hurt, harmed, or injured. And I was a first-time felony offender. And I've gained so much knowledge, I've gained so much, experience, and I've accepted responsibility for what I did wrong. What other reasons did it keep me in prison?
When Donte Mitchell was 17 years old, he was sentenced as an adult to 35 to 70 years in prison. His sentence is comparable to that of a murderer, even though no one was injured in his crime. Black youth are 9 times more likely to be sentenced as adults than white youth. Donte has now spent more than half of his life in prison, and he's not eligible for parole for 6 more years.
When the judge told me 30 years, I kind of been in denial a long time.
Donte, who grew up in Albany, New York, describes his childhood as traumatic. He witnessed abuse, his father wasn't around, and his mother was addicted to drugs.
It was very, very hard for Donte, but he was a good kid. He would man up, he would feed his sisters, he would clean the house. He just did a lot more than a young child should have to do.
At 11 years old, Donte was removed from his mother's home. For the next 5 years, he lived in various foster care homes before aging out of the system at 16. He ended up at a temporary shelter for homeless youth called Equinox.
Equinox was in Albany, New York. It was just, the staff, they were pretty cool. They were, very responsive to the needs of the children there. I just never had that, having that level of adult support and caring.
There was something kind of striking about Donte, and that was how quick-witted he was, how intelligent he was. I mean, it was just obvious the first time he opened his mouth and talked about himself was that this is a very, very bright young man.
Donte bonded with the staff at Equinox and even flourished during his time there. He got his GED and started working part-time. But after 60 days, he had to move out due to state law. Donte moved in with an aunt and says it was there that his step-cousin introduced him to the idea of breaking the law.
I was always the one that wanted to work. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to do these things, so I wasn't really exposed to that. But when I did become exposed to it, it was just like, all right, let's try it, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
First, Donte and his cousin tried a few robberies. Then Donte held up a McDonald's where he had previously worked.
I went in there with 2 guns, a mask on, fired 1 shot over the sign, told everybody, what did I say? I can't remember exactly what I told everybody. I think I said freeze, don't move, whatever. Some kid stuff. Told 1 girl, put the money in the bag. I took the manager in the back, had him open up the safe and put the money in the bag. Then I said, everybody go in the freezer and put a lock on it. I knew they can get out because they have it's a safety, because people might get locked in freezers, so they had a safety. But that was slow them down, and I left. I don't know what I was thinking. I couldn't have been thinking anything. Just being a kid, thinking, that's my cousin, you're into it, why not? Not really looking at the long-term consequences for that type of life. It was just boneheaded.
Despite being 17 and a first-time felony offender, Donte was charged as an adult and received the maximum sentence of 35 to 70 years, which was reduced to 25 to 50 due to state sentencing laws.
Nobody was hurt. Nobody was injured. Nobody was killed. Nobody was beaten. Nobody was stabbed. And here's a young man who may spend 50 years in prison.
All of this happened at a time when rising crimes among teens triggered a public fear of juvenile criminals.
They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Thousands of juveniles across the country, mostly young men of color, were sentenced to life without parole or given the death penalty. The amount of prisoners under 18 years old in adult prisons doubled and reached a peak of 5,400 on a single day in 1997.
We take people who do violent things because something violent has been done to them or they've lived in some place where violence is part of life, and we put them in a place to modify that behavior that runs on violence. You can't survive unless you know deeply the power of violence.
Sentenced the day before his 18th birthday, Daunte entered the maximum security prison, Great Meadow Correctional Facility.
There's no real rehabilitation. There's not even a goal of rehabilitation. It's just lock them up, keep them away for a few years, and then somehow, they expect you to be cured of whatever it was that you went to prison for, and you're not.
This environment doesn't nurture pro-social behavior, doesn't nurture that type of, mentality or behavior. It really nurtures you to be the thug, the gangster, the killer, because those guys in this environment get the most respect.
For Daunte, the road to redemption was not straight. In 2002, he attacked another prisoner in what he says was self-defense and had 2 to 4 more years added to his sentence.
I'm not a model prisoner. I'm not perfect, and I've had issues, disciplinary issues, adjustment issues. I accept all that. I grew up in here, though. This is where I reached my maturity. I became an adult in prison. What did you expect? You gotta be insane to want this, and what this imposes upon your character. Who wants to go back into society and come back to prison? Who wants that? And it's kind of sad, because you would think that any rational person would say, I want to do better. But a lot of guys are not going out there with the skills to be able to succeed.